It's an alternate 1928, and the Republic of China is in disarray. The ideological fanatics of the Kuomintang under their new leader, Chiang Kai Shek, have staked their bid to national leadership, executing the Northern Exhibition in order to destroy what they would call the Beiyang government. Zhang Zuolin, who had styled himself Generalissimo of the Republic of China, would have just returned from his devastating defeat against the Kuomintang. In our timeline, despite Zhang's incredible influence, he would be assassinated by the Japanese in attempts to install his hedonistic son, Zhang Zuiliang, as the leader of Manchuria. Their hope was that they could use his son's vices against him and slowly gain control over the resource-rich, strategically vital region of Manchuria for themselves. However, once he had become the warlord of Manchuria, he had recognized Chiang Kai Shek as the true leader of China. What resulted was a period known as the Nanjing Decade, where there was only the Kuomintang as a national claimant, with very few warlords attempting to distance themselves, and a middling communist movement which was always on the run. In our history, the Japanese would eventually begin pressuring the KMT further and further with the aim to completely subjugate the young democracy. However, in this timeline, the role of a foreign power attempting to subjugate China would not be the Japanese, but instead the USSR under the leadership of Trotsky. The initial invasion of Trotsky would see Manchuria slowly occupied by the Soviet Union. With this sudden invasion, the entire dynamic of the Northern Exhibition has been thrown off its historical course. But why would the Soviets ever invade China? Welcome to episode 3 of German October. I'm very excited to unveil the primary conflict of the series. In order to best enjoy this episode, I recommend getting caught up with the series until this point. Link will be in the top right. With that, let's answer our question: why the invasion? For the sake of our story, we'll be focusing on two different governments, the Beiyang government and the nationalist government. This era of conflict began after the Qing dynasty was deposed. A Republican revolutionary, Yat Sen, had managed to gain enough sway politically to force the abdication of the monarchy. However, this was only possible with the support of the Qing army under the leadership of Yuan Shikai. This Republic of China would only last for 3 years, between 1912 and 1915, where Yuan would betray the revolution and proclaim himself Emperor of China. This move was essentially rejected by all, and would mark the beginning of the warlord era, where regions of the government of China would be governed by military leaders with their own armies, essentially operating as small statelets. The Republic of China, known as the Beiyang government, that followed Yuan's failed monarchical restoration and his death, would be marred by intense political instability due to the strength of these warlords and weakness of the government. This instability had allowed for the Beiyang government to fall under international influence. This foreign influence came in the form of large, irresponsibly negotiated loans from foreign investors. One notable example is Duan Guri's acceptance of a significant loan from Japan, which also involved the concession of key ports within Beiyang governmental control. These irresponsible loans would, if unchecked, inevitably cause China to slowly be subjugated by international capitalist forces, which gave rise to the May 4th movement, and soon after, the rise of communism in China. The May 4th movement was the result of a direct reaction from the Chinese populace who rejected the stipulations of the Treaty of Versailles. This resistance against the Treaty of Versailles and its focus on anti-imperialist sentiment would soon give rise to the popularization of communism in China, with the Communist Party of China being founded not too soon after. While the rise of a Communist Party in a major country bordering the Soviet Union would have surely been seen as a good thing, in reality, Moscow didn't have much faith in the Communist Party of China. This may be attributed to China's lack of an industrial proletariat, something that Trotsky and his followers like Karl Radek had believed were necessary for a communist revolution. Due to their lack of faith in the communist Chinese to execute a revolution, a two-stage revolution model was adopted instead. In 1920, after Sun Yat-sen had returned to China from exile and founded the Guangzhou military government, he was approached by Soviet diplomats who wanted to forge an alliance with him. A stipulation of this hypothetical alliance was that he would need to allow for the Communist Party of China to operate unfettered in his state, and as a result, form a united front against the Beiyang government. Sun Yat-sen had agreed to ally with the Soviets, so long as the CCP as an organization was dissolved in favor of alignment with the KMT itself. So in other words, the communists were allowed to be communists so long as they did not organize into a separate party and continued to support the KMT. After Sun Yat-sen's death, and a power struggle for leadership resulting in the pro-war rightist faction of the KMT winning out over the leftist one, Chiang Kai Shek would begin the Northern Exhibition, the Kuomintang's attempt to destroy the Beiyang government and unite China under their rule. As this military campaign was underway, Shanghai was taken by communist militias in 1924. Seeing as the communists and the KMT were in a coalition, when the Kuomintang requested access to the city, the communists had accepted. But what had followed was a brutal slaughter of the communists by the KMT. Despite the united front, Chiang would act against the communists there in order to fully capture the historic city for himself. This betrayal of the united front would destroy it, leading to a period of political instability in China. Chiang Kai Shek's rival, Wang Jingwei, would organize a rival government in Wuhan. This rival government had sought to continue the collaboration between the Soviet Union and the Chinese Communists, while still seeking to adhere to the principles of Sun Yat-sen's ideology. During this split, Stalin had sent directives to his attachés in the Wuhan government, directing them to raise an army of communists, giving them weapons, and demanded to significantly increase communist presence in Wang's rival government. Wang had believed that Stalin was seeking to use his rival government as means to strengthen the communist movement, giving them a successor government directly related to the legendary Sun Yat-sen. Therefore, the Wuhan rival government would disband only a year later, with Wang expelling communists from his rival government and swearing fealty to Chiang, who had successfully managed to destroy the Beiyang government, leaving the Kuomintang as the sole legitimate government of China. This failure to resist the rise of Chiang would ultimately result in Wang Jingwei's exile from China, and, after the Japanese invasion of China, sway him to collaborate with the Imperial Japanese. However, in this alternate timeline, the fate of China manifests in a much different way. Seeing as in 1924, the now leader of the Soviet Union, Trotsky, had used the political instability of Germany, following his manipulation of the Reichswehr, to outright conquer northern Germany for the Soviet Union. Wang would not organize any sort of rival government after Chiang's Shanghai Massacre, and would therefore keep the KMT united and far more capable in their northern exhibition. The consequences of Trotsky's political maneuvering had come to haunt him. Trotsky's ideal of spreading communism to as many countries as possible in order to help dismantle the capitalist world order now had a significant delay thanks to the KMT's dismantling of the United Front. Without a fifth column of leftist KMT or a dormant communist movement, the ideal of a Chinese two-stage revolution in the style of Lenin's October Revolution was now impossible. Already facing critique from several party members, but without any political means to silence his opposition, Trotsky was hoping to use a successful communist revolution in China as a means to increase his support base, as the current leader of the CCP, Chen Duixiu, had professed his admiration of Trotsky. Now that the KMT had begun suppressing communists in their own realm, going directly against the united front that had been negotiated with Sun Yat-sen, the Soviet Union now had a reason to outright invade China. The Trotskyite 5-year plan, which had previously been focused on industrialization the RSFSR, had been adjusted to suit the new ambitions of Trotsky. Railroads connecting the East and West would be established for the purpose of supplying their invasion efforts, and the industrial factories, which had initially been focused on improving the quality of life of the average proletarian, had been rapidly shifted to accommodate the expansion of the military. Despite this shift in policy, the leader of the Red Army, Mikhail Tukhachevsky, would request Trotsky for another year or two of preparation prior to acting. However, due to the political pressure, Trotsky would insist that the invasion occur as soon as possible, despite his concerns. After the troops were organized enough, Trotsky had given the order to destroy the false Beiyang and Kuomintang governments and spread the revolution to the Chinese proletariat. The primary war aims of the Soviets in their invasion would be to link up with the Soviet zones, which had been established in response to Chiang Kai Shek's shattering of the United Front. These Soviet zones would be the first victims of Chiang Kai Shek's encirclement campaigns. The Kuomintang would only be able to truly eliminate these Soviet zones via military advisors and military aid. In our timeline, this doctrinal support would be spearheaded by the leader of the Weimar government's military, Hans von Seet. However, as he'd be dead and the majority of Germany was under Soviet control, these German tactics would instead be used against the reactionary Chinese, granting the Soviet Union an edge in this conflict. With the split attention between the Northern Expedition and the invasion from the north, and with the support from the People's Republic of Mongolia, the Soviets had managed to seize all of Manchuria, Outer Mongolia, and Beijing for the communist cause. This rapid success shocked the world and escalated the conflict to a far greater extent. While initially, Western recognition of the true government of China was mixed, there was now no doubt that the Kuomintang had become the eastern bulwark against communism, and thus the Stresa Front would begin heavily supporting Chiang Kai Shek's government, and international recognition had spread across the board. But one nation had prerequisites prior to the recognition of the Kuomintang. The Sino-Japanese War of our timeline had defined an entire theater of the Second World War. The Japanese ambitions to empire had them supporting the Beiyang government economically and militarily. Their ambitions would be foiled by popular resistance, and despite their scheming, would result in the Kuomintang uniting China under a period known as the Nanjing Decade. This decade would be disrupted with the Japanese invasion of Manchuria, and further pressuring of the Nanjing government would persist until a breaking point was reached. Japan and China would fight an elongated, bitter war of resistance under a second united front, before eventually capitulating to the victorious Allied powers. With this historical precedent in mind, the idea that Japan would attempt any sort of friendly negotiations with Chiang Kai Shek's government is hard to consider. However, given the fact that they had both shared a direct enemy in the communists, there is no doubt that even the imperialist Japanese would change their foreign policy. But if they were to fully recognize this Republic of China, and collaborate in their efforts to push back the communists, deals had to be made. As mentioned before, Japan had attempted to exert influence over the Beiyang government with heavy loans and negotiating treaty ports. However, there were many other attempts to gain influence. An example of this was the Sino-Japanese Joint Defense Agreement. In 1918, prior to the founding of the rival nationalist government in 1925, this treaty would have granted the Japanese special permissions to station troops and fortify garrisons against the Sino-Russian border. However, due to the conditions of this secret treaty becoming public, the agreement would never truly take effect, and was another contributing factor towards the May 4th movement and communism spreading in China. Now, the consequences of allowing for communist ideas in China have resulted in a direct military conflict. This level of disaster for the Chinese people could have been prevented if they had allowed for their Asian brothers in Japan to protect them from their hostile neighbor. This propagandic edge would sway many people, including Chiang Kai Shek, to the side of the Japanese. Chiang Kai Shek, encouraged by the continued support of the Japanophilic faction of the KMT, led by Wang Jingwei, would agree to a reconsideration of the Sino-Japanese Joint Defense Agreement, allowing for Japanese special interests in northern China to be secured in exchange for the direct aid against the Soviet attack. Thus, Japan would come to the side of the Chinese nationalists as a protector, and would begin to push back against the Soviet occupation of Manchuria, reinstalling the warlords' control in the region, but with full recognition for the Nanjing government, rather than any sort of restoration of the Beiyang government. How would this sudden introduction of the Imperial Japanese to the conflict mean for the Soviet advance into China? Would the Koreans see the opportunity for independence? How will the Soviet Union handle the occupations of Chinese territory? And how will the Stresa Front react to the Sino-Japanese alliance? All these questions and more will be answered in episode 4 of German October, as the conflict in China continues to manifest. And that was German October episode 3. Thank you very much for watching. Sorry it didn't come out last week. My life is really crazy right now. The future is very uncertain. I'm doing my best to keep up with the content. I really want to see this project to the end because I really believe in this story, and I hope that you stay along for the ride. We're really close to 10,000 subscribers, which is an amazing milestone. It would be awesome if by the end of the year we could reach 10k. If you haven't subscribed, please consider doing so. It would mean a lot to me. Just a quick shout out to Sarah for your continued advice. Thank you very much for your help. Shout out to Enzo Rafael Souza Silva, Grud, Jubs, and Solo Leo for being channel members. Thank you so much for your support. If you want to have your name shouted out at the end of my video, please consider supporting the channel by getting a membership. Don't make promises you can't keep. And I hope you have a good day. Bye bye, Lord Boy.
Bye bye.
Have a good day.
Press the button.
If you press this button, then it'll stop. Press this on the mouse.
No.
Just click here. What's this one?
This one?
Yeah.